We recently bought a house here in the area, so you're not going to be getting rid of the Rossi Posse. That's what we call ourselves. It's a cool nickname, the Rossi Posse. Anytime soon, we're putting down roots here. We bought a house in Miamisburg. What's funny is we bought the house. We were renting a house, and we bought the house directly across the street from us. Like literally, we changed one number in our address, which is awesome. Easiest move ever, right? But when you move, all of a sudden you realize, like us, like we have tons of junk, like just tons of junk. And, we moved from Mount Vernon to this area 2 years ago. And I'm opening up boxes that we packed when we moved 2 years ago, thinking, why in the world did we even move this here? And we probably taped it back up and moved it back across the street. And I'll ask myself again, why do we move this across the street, right? But we take advantage when we move of purging, getting rid of stuff, throwing it away, or selling it. And we sold a lot of stuff on Facebook Marketplace. I don't know if you've ever used Facebook Marketplace. It's really good and really awful all at the same time. If you don't know what Facebook Marketplace is you post an item on this marketplace, and then you get 100 messages of, hey, is this still available? And you say yes, and then they never respond. And it's great. I'm like, awesome. That's great. So we sold stuff. And it's funny because when you sell things or get rid of things, it's funny because you look at it and be like, man, this is something at one point in my life that was really useful, served a great purpose. Like we sold our cribs, the baby cribs. We sold the changing pads and all the baby toys because we're out of the infant stage. And I know that hurts my wife, Sam, to say out loud, but for me, I'm like, thank goodness we're out of the infant stage. But we sold it, right? At one point, that stuff was extremely useful to us. I mean, really important. The cribs, their toys, the changing pad. Now, we're out of that phase. Serves no purpose for us anymore, but serves someone else a purpose. I post that stuff online, and usually I price it because I don't want to haggle. I price stuff low, just that way people come and get it, and people are ecstatic. They're like, I really need a crib. It's very useful, but for us, we don't need it anymore. When we move, we also find things that serve no purpose at all anymore. Like we had this lamp that I remember someone gave us when Sam and I got married, and it's broken. And I'm like, why do we have this broken lamp? Like, what are we doing, like just hauling around broken lamps? So we just throw stuff like that away. And so it's funny, there's things that we have that serve a purpose at one point, and sometimes they don't serve a purpose anymore. Now, things like the crib and the changing table, that's useful to someone else, but the broken lamp serves no one, no purpose. It's useless at that point. We throw it away at that point. And so I started to think to myself, what about our purpose? Are we ever useful or useless in our purpose as Christians? And today we're going to look at a passage that kind of talks about our purpose and being used in this ministry. So I got to thinking about this, and especially since we're in this sermon series of the harvest, where the whole idea is, man, we want to connect more people to Jesus. If you don't know, that's our mission statement here at the church. We just want to connect more people to Jesus. And in the harvest is the whole idea of, man, we want those people who don't know Jesus to come to know Jesus, because Jesus did something incredible in our lives and transformed our lives, that we want other people to experience that same transformation. Today, the passage we're looking at deals with this whole idea of us being used in the kingdom. But before we get to that passage, I think it'd be good to kind of set up what was happening before this. So we're going to be looking at Matthew 5 today. We're going to be looking, it's in the Sermon on the Mount, but right before this, Jesus just started his ministry. Like Jesus just got baptized, and then he was in the desert, he was being tempted, and then at the end of Matthew 4, it says Jesus was going around, he was teaching in the synagogues, and he was performing miracles, and he was healing people, and people started to come from all around to see who Jesus was. And it says one day at the beginning of chapter 5 in Matthew that Jesus stood, and he saw his disciples, and he saw the crowd gather. Now, there's two different kinds of people here. Jesus looks, he sees his disciples, people who are already bought in, right? Like, I am a follower of Jesus. I am bought in. I want to follow Jesus. And then there's the people that are like, I've been hearing this guy's been healing people and performing miracles, and that when he teaches, he's an incredible speaker. I'm here to figure out who this Jesus is. So you have disciples and you have seekers. Sounds a lot like the church today, right? People who are already bought in, and then people who are here to hear, what does Jesus have to say? Who is this Jesus anyway? So Jesus looked around, and he decided he was going to teach. And mainly, this Sermon on the Mount is directed to his disciples, but it's also for the seekers to hear, hey, this is what it means to be a disciple and follower of me. So today, it's Matthew 5:13 through 16. It's this: you are the salt of the earth. But if salt lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Now, I love this passage. It's one of my favorites. In fact, I'm wearing my salty and lit shirt that I've gotten from a youth ministry conference. I love it. And I don't know about you, but the first time I heard this passage, I'm like, what in the world does it mean to be salt? That makes no sense to me at all. To be salt and to be light, these two things. And as I got older, I realized, well, it's God using us in ministry, right? That it's a way that we're carrying on this ministry. And when I think that Jesus looks at his disciples and say that you are the light and you are the salt, it's daunting. It weighs heavy on me at times. It's a huge responsibility to think that Jesus entrusts humans to continue on the ministry and to spread the gospel. And for me, there's times that, man, I've gotten it wrong. And there'll still be days that I will get it wrong. But man, every day I want to get better. And maybe you're sitting here this morning and you've heard this 1,000 times and you still don't know what it means practically to be salt and to be light. A lot of times we just talk about these things. We're like, what does it practically mean to be salt on the earth, right? What does it mean to be salt? What does it mean to be light? I think one of the important things too is to understand what they thought when they heard salt and light. So we're going to break this down today. We're going to break down the meaning of salt and light, and then we're going to look at how that looks practically in our own lives. So let's start with salt first. Now, I know some of you guys love salt. I love salt. I love salt a lot. Before I even taste my food, I'm already salting it. Is there anyone else here like that this morning? You get your food and you're immediately just throwing salt and seasonings on it. You drive through McDonald's and get the French fries that are already salty, but you're already opening salt packets to make the fries more salty. It's amazing, right? We love salt. But then when I hear Jesus say, you are the salt of the earth, I'm like, what does that mean? What does that mean? I think it's important to understand what salt was used for then. Some ways are similar, but some ways are very different. See, Jesus, like he normally does, didn't say exactly what he meant. He said, you are the salt of the earth. We would love here if he said, you are the salt on the earth, which means blank, 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 right? But instead, he left it up for them to understand. And maybe those disciples and seekers heard that in the moment and thought, well, oh yeah, that makes sense. But for us, living thousands of years later, we'd be like, what does that mean? I mean, we use salt to throw on the roads for, clear ice and snow off. So what's it mean to be salt? So back then, there was a couple different things that they used salt for, some similar, some different. So we're going to go through 3 of these ways that salt was used back then and talk about maybe what does that look like in our lives to be salt. So the first thing is, back then, salt was used primarily as a preservative. Now, back then, there was no refrigeration. There was no freezers. If they wanted to keep meat for more than a couple days, they had to put salt on it to preserve it, right? Nowadays, we use salt sometimes, but we don't use it near the way that they did because we have fridges, we have freezers, and we have all these chemicals and preservatives that I don't know how to pronounce that I'm sure are good for me. I mean, those Twinkies last forever, and they're so good. Have you ever read some of those things? I don't know what it is, but back then it was crucial. I mean, salt was crucial. If you wanted to keep something for a while, you had to use salt as a preservative. I don't know if anyone here like me has an irrational fear of food poisoning, but I have that. I check the expiration date on everything. Literally everything. I've had food poisoning twice in my life. And like, I'll be in the kitchen. I see some of you nodding your head. I'll be in the kitchen. I'll pull the eggs out, and I'm like looking around the box, like frantically searching for the expiration date. And my wife, it drives her nuts. She was like, I bought it like 2 days ago, Andrew. I'm like, I don't care. I got to look. Like, I got to make sure it's fine. And then things like milk, like, man, if it's even a couple days close, I have to give it a smell test. Like, I got to open that milk and smell it. And if it smells a little bit off, I'm not trying it. So back then, I mean, salt was it. They had to use salt to preserve things for going bad. So what does this mean? Maybe Jesus is saying, hey, looking at his disciples, I want you to take this thing that I am going to start here, and I want you to preserve it and carry it forward, that I am going to use you as my disciples, that when I leave, I'm going to empower you with my Spirit, and I want you to preserve this thing, and I want you to go on with this gospel because, the gospel does not have an expiration date. It goes on, and it's for everybody, and I'm going to use you, and you are going to be the good. You're going to make those things bad good, because that's the thing. Salt takes those things and keeps it from going bad. And in our world today, where it seems like every day things are getting worse and worse, maybe Jesus is saying, hey, in a world that's getting more dark and more worse, I want you to be the good. I want you to keep it from going bad. I want you to preserve this thing, right? We could probably all think of someone in our life that we love having around just because they're always a good time, right? They're positive, they're kind, they're patient. Maybe that's the picture for us, is that in that environment, man, Jesus said, hey, I want you in those times where there seems to be no hope, I want you to be the good. And I want you to take this message, I want you to keep it going and be the good in other people's lives. Because when we're the good, they're like, man, there's something different about that guy. What's a little bit different about him, right? The second thing that they use salt for, is very similar to us, it's for flavor, to taste, to flavor things, right? And fun fact for you guys, you don't put salt on food to make it salty. You put salt on food to actually enhance the foods, even though I like the taste of salt. And I'm not a scientist by any means or measure. In fact, science was like my worst subject. In college, I got a D in both biology and geology. It's like reading a different language to me. So take this with a grain of salt. Anyway, so I looked up how is it that salt enhances food? So there's a couple reasons why salt enhances food. The first reason is salt, sodium, when it's put into food, it breaks down certain compounds in the food, such as like things that are bitter. So if something's bitter, salt helps break down those compounds while leaving other things, like sugar, thank you, untouched. So salt will enhance the food by taking some things out while leaving the others to enhance the flavor. It also decreases the water activity in food, because I don't know, in food there's water, and so salt helps absorb that. So when it absorbs the water and decreases the amount of water in food, it leaves those other flavors to be more enhanced. A good example of this is, I don't know if you guys like guacamole, but I love making guacamole. So if you take and make guacamole, you get like the avocados, the garlic, the cilantro, the lime, the onions, and the tomatoes, and you mix it all up. And if you just do that and mix all that up together and get a chip and take a bite, you're like, man, that does not really taste all that flavorful. Salt is so important when it comes to guacamole, because as soon as you put salt in the guacamole, all of a sudden all those other flavors start to come out. Not that it tastes salty, but all of it starts tasting good. And I'm getting hungry just talking about this, and all of us are going to be at Chipotle as soon as the sermon's over, getting the extra wok that we know is extra every time they ask us, right? We want it. Give us the wok. So salt helps enhance the flavors. Another cool thing is, salt has a way of making us thirsty. Like when I eat bacon, I get more thirsty for more bacon, right, guys? You just like, I can eat more bacon. No, it makes us thirsty. So when Jesus says you are the salt, maybe he's like, hey, I want you to enhance other people's life. I want you to live in a way around people that they see a difference and they're thirsty for what you have. That they're so thirsty because like, man, this guy, he's always happy. And I'm struggling because I'm like wanting more and more and more. And I'm feeling like I'm not becoming happy because I'm putting all of my happiness in getting this or obtaining this. But he just seems like he's got it all together. He's always kind. And I'm thirsty for that. So maybe Jesus said, hey, I want you to be that person in someone's life that makes them thirst for what you have because you live differently. So maybe we can be the good, and maybe we can be the enhancement in other people's life where people see a difference and want what we have. The third thing about salt back then is salt was much more valuable back then. like much more valuable. History shows us that Rome actually paid some of its soldiers in salt. So if a soldier wasn't living up to its duty or wasn't performing well, they would say that he was not worth his salt, right? That's where that saying comes from, because they paid it in salt. That's how valuable salt was. If we got paid in salt today, we would be like, man, I could have gone to Burger King and got a bag full of these salt packets, right? Like, man, like they hand those things out, like if they get caught with them, they're going to get in trouble with those salt packets. We'd be wealthy today, but back then it was so valuable. And so I can only imagine these disciples sitting there and hearing Jesus speak to them, and Jesus is basically saying, like, you are of great value. You disciples, you don't know how valuable you are, that, again, there's going to be a day when I am not here, and I'm going to entrust you and give you my spirit, that you are going to carry this on. And you are created in the image, and you bring so much value to the people around you, and that you're going to bring so much value to the kingdom through me. So salt this morning, I mean, it could be quite a few things. It could be God saying, hey, I want you to be the good. You know, I want you to be the good. I want you to enhance, and you are of great value. Well, here's one thing. Salt doesn't work unless it makes contact with the food. So we, in our lives, need to make sure that we are making contact with those people who don't know Jesus, that we are connecting them with Jesus. I think I already said this before, but, as a church, our mission is that we want to connect more people with Jesus. And this is the way we do it. We need to connect with them, or else they won't connect with him. He goes on with another metaphor. He says, you are the light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. So salt and light are used a lot in verses. Light more than salt. Like there's a lot of verses that use light. So real quickly, I want to go through like a few things that Jesus could be talking about when he's talking about light. The first thing with light is that one thing we all use light for is it's to illuminate a path. When we walk into a room and it's dark, we immediately flip on the switch, because if we don't, we're going to be stumbling all over the place. Sometimes we take it for granted because it's so easy to turn on lights. At night when we get in our car, we either got an automatic headlights, or like me, I still have to flip my headlights on if I want to be able to see the road and make sure I don't hit anything. Light illuminates path. Light helps us get around in the darkness. And so I can only imagine us being a light in people's lives and around us is, man, Jesus might be saying, hey, I want you to live in a way that people like you're illuminating this way to the truth and life, right? That you are living in a way that is attractable, that people want what you have. And, a lot of these things seem to kind of go together, right? The second thing light does is it opposes darkness. One thing for sure is that it can't be dark where there is light, right? Wherever there is light, there can't be darkness. And I can only imagine that Jesus is giving this illustration. It could be like, hey, I want you to be the light, so that way people who don't know me see that there's a difference in the way the world lives, and there's a difference in the way that I live, and that I created you to live. And so that way you can be that light in the darkness. And that way, the only way that they can see the light is by you living this out. Because light, it opposes those things, right? And the third thing, light cannot be hidden. In my opinion, this is probably what Jesus was more along the lines of thinking, because as he was standing there delivering this Sermon on the Mount, scholars say there was actually a city up on the hill where they thought he was standing, he was pointing to, because Jesus alludes to this fact that just like that city on a hill, it's unmistakable. Wherever there's light, there's no mistake that there's light. Wherever there's a city in darkness, there's no mistake that there is a city there in darkness, right? There's no denying that. One cool thing with light, that when we are in darkness, our eyes are attracted to light. I don't know if you guys have ever been to in a cave. I grew up in Kentucky where Mammoth Cave was. I remember we went a couple years, and there's one part where they take us deep into the cave and they shut out all the lights, and it's actual complete darkness. There's only two places that you can experience complete darkness. It's in caves to a certain point, and at a sea level a certain point. And like you literally can't see the hand like in front of your face. It's so crazy. But as they start to bring on some lights, your eyes are immediately attracted to those lights. And scientists say that we are attracted to light. So I have this light here this morning. It's actually my son Judah's light. I took it from his room the other day. If I were to open this, now it is kind of bright, so I don't stare right at it. If I were to open this, I mean, it's a pretty bright light, right? But up here on stage with all these other lights, it's not that impressive, right? It's just a light. But I'm going to close this, but go ahead and turn the lights off real quick. In darkness, all of a sudden, that becomes a lot more impressive, right? This becomes a lot more impressive that this little light in a dark room is much more attractable. Our eyes are drawn to this. Go ahead and turn the lights back on so I don't fall off stage. There we go. Light is, we are attracted to light. We are to live in a way that is attractable. I believe this is exactly what Jesus is saying, is that we're supposed to live in a way that's undeniable. Just as this light in this room is undeniable, there is a light up here. It should be undeniable that we are following Jesus, that we have the Holy Spirit inside of us, that there's no mistaking who we follow. I heard a pastor, I read this quote that a pastor friend of mine put on social media the other day. This is what he said. He said, if the people around you don't know you follow Jesus, you probably don't. That's tough. And I read that and I wanted to comment like, hey man, like I don't know about that. But if the people around you don't know you follow Jesus, you probably don't. And if you're like me, sometimes you may think like, well, I just don't want to shove it down anyone's throat, and I don't want to be, argumentative, and I don't want to create or cross boundaries at work or anything like that. I follow Jesus, I don't talk about it much, right? Well, this is what Jesus has to say about that. In verse 15, he says, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you're a disciple, if you've made that commitment and you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, but you live in a way that no one knows you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, it's as useless as turning on a light and putting a blanket over it. Now, think about this. Back then, it was a lot more difficult. There's a lot more going into putting a light on. So they had oil lamps. They were like these little clay pots. You'd fill it up with oil, and then you had to light it. Now, they didn't just have a big lighter to pull out and light the lamp, right? It was a process to light a light. And so Jesus is saying, why in the world would you go through that whole process of lighting a lamp just to put it under a basket? It makes no sense, right? That just makes no sense. And in fact, it's almost impossible. Like, why would anyone do that? It doesn't make any sense. So if you were to say, well, I follow Jesus, but I don't want to live in a way that, people know that. Jesus, it's just like lighting a lamp and putting it under a basket. He has a similar thought with salt. It says this, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Again, if you're living in a way that people are not seeing Christ in you, Jesus, this is Jesus' word saying it's as useless as salt that's lost its saltiness, and it's good for nothing and might as well be thrown out to be trampled under people's feet. Just like that lamp we had that was broken, it lost its purpose for everything, right? It served no purpose. We tossed it out. Salt loses purpose, toss it out. If you say you're a follower of Jesus, but you're not living in a way that other people can see Jesus, Jesus is saying it's just as useless as that lamp that no longer works. It's just as useless as lighting a light just to put it under a basket. It just doesn't work that way. You got to be living out the Great Commission and trying to further the kingdom of God. But one thing I want to ask myself, that I've asked myself and challenged myself with this, is to think about, can salt even lose its saltiness? Technically, it can't, right? So Jesus, in the metaphor, he says if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be restored? It can't. It's useless now. Well, salt is a stable compound. It can't lose its saltiness. Now, back then, the way that they used salt, there may have been a couple reasons why. Like, bakers would have the stone that had salt in it that they'd bake with. Some of the salt the fire would burn it off. Then it would be useless, so they'd throw it out. Or other ways, they harvested salt from the Dead Sea. Some of the particles looked like salt, but weren't actually salt. So it's possible that there could have been salt that lost its saltiness, but in reality, salt cannot lose its saltiness. That maybe Jesus is saying here, like, man, if you are a follower of me, it's impossible not to live in a way that brings the good to the people around you, to enhance the lives of people around you and make them thirsty for what you have, and to be a light in a dark world and people see that there's a difference in the way you live, that there's no way that you can do that. So what does this look like for us this morning? Like, practically, We talk about salt and light all the time, but practically, what does it look like to be salt and light? Well, as I was preparing for this message, I challenged myself the last 2 weeks to read the whole Sermon on the Mount all the way through every single day. And so I read it every single day, and I noticed the way Jesus began the Sermon on the Mount. And I believe it's the key to unlocking exactly what he means by being the salt and light. So let's look at Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12, because he starts his sermon with the Beatitudes. And this is how it starts. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and began to speak. Let me stop right there. How many of us, when we speak, start with opening our mouths? All of us, unless you're a ventriloquist, and those people freak me out, right? But we all open our mouths, right? And I'm like, why in the world is Matthew putting this detail? Like, obviously, Jesus opened his mouth, obviously. Well, this is exactly like kind of what David spoke with the parable at the beginning, that this is a cue for us to listen. That this is exactly why Matthew put Jesus opened his mouth. Because just picture it. We are disciples sitting there. Jesus gets up and he opens his mouth. You could probably hear a pin drop. So I think this is Matthew saying like, hey, it's time to listen because Jesus is about to do some serious teaching here. So let's go on. It says, he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, so they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The very next verse, verse 13, is this right here. You are the salt of the earth. I don't know about you guys, when I read this, sometimes I read them in sections, right? We can kind of get into that whole thing, like, well, let me read the Beatitudes. Well, let me read this. Where I think it's very fair to say that Jesus didn't stop his sermon. He was like, all right, that's one part of the sermon. Here's the next part that has nothing to do with this, right? Because he immediately says, you who are humble, you who seek peace, you who give mercy, you are the salt of the earth. So this morning, as we're sitting here and thinking, man, how can I be a light? And how can I be a salt? And how can I be used in the kingdom? How can I be used in the Great Commission? I'm having a hard time understanding if I'm being used. The Beatitudes are a great start. I think it's clear to say that Jesus is saying, you who are these things, who demonstrate these things and live these things out, are the salt and light. And why is that? Again, because it sets us apart from the world. We should be people who live set apart, otherwise known as holy. One of my favorite verses is Hebrews 12, 14 through 15 says this, strive for peace with everyone and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and and many become defiled. That we should seek peace, one of the Beatitudes, and to seek to be holy. Without holiness, people cannot see the Lord. So this morning, Jesus is saying, if you're the salt and light, you are these things. And we can't become these things unless we're relying on the Holy Spirit to help us become these things. It's a process. It's not all of a sudden one day we are perfect at these things. Every day it's us fully surrendering to God, saying, God, help me be more patient. Help me show more mercy. Help me show these people you by the way I live and act, that we are set apart. I love too in this verse 15, it says that there's no root of bitterness, because as we talked about, salt, one of those things it does is it helps break down bitterness. That as people, we should strive for peace, not people of bitterness. And that's how we can live set apart for people to see a difference. So much that we are like that city set up on a hill. Now, my family, we moved to Tucson, Arizona one time. We lived there for 2 years. I remember when we went to visit, I was 14 years old, and we were in the plane flying, and our first connection was in Las Vegas, and it was at night. And I remember as a 14-year-old sitting there in the plane. It was dark because you're flying over all these deserts that nothing's there. And then all of a sudden, like the whole cabin in the plane just lights everywhere. And the pilot comes on like, prepare for descent into Las Vegas. I'm like, obviously, you look down, it's like this massive square of like lights like blinding you. Now, I'm not saying we should be like Las Vegas at all, but what I am saying here is, man, we should live in a way that it's unmistakable, the light that we have within us. This is the way that lights up the entire world, like everything around it, right? That's exactly what Jesus said, that we need to be that city up on a hill. It's unmistakable. People look at us, say, man, I want what they have. And then that way, Jesus says, hey, that light, by your good works and by the way you live, can give glory to your Father in heaven. By the way we live, by the way we love one another, we can fulfill and serve our purpose and be useful. I always say, our first purpose is to be in a relationship with your Creator, that you were created to be in a relationship with God. And the second purpose is to be in relations with others. And not only relationship, but in a relationship in a way that points them back to God. That we need to be making disciples of Jesus. Last week, David challenged you guys to write down 5 people's names and that need to know Jesus more. This week, I want to tack on to that. This week, with those 5 same people that you wrote down their names, I want you to ask yourself, how am I being salt and light in these 5 people's days? How am I showing mercy and grace and humility? How am I serving them? One thing I always do is every morning I ask God, I pray, say, don't let me miss the opportunity. Because if it's just on me to look for the opportunity to share something, I'm going to miss it myself. Don't let me miss the opportunity to be the light in someone's life today. So this week, I challenge you, ask yourself every day, God, please don't let me miss the opportunity to be the light in these people's lives. These 5 people that I love, and these 5 people I want to know you, help me be the light in their lives. And if you don't know where to start with the Sermon on the Mount, with the Beatitudes, to becoming those things, to be a people set apart, because we are to be the good in life, we are supposed to bring flavor, help people thirst for righteousness, we are set apart, you are valuable in the ministry, and you can be a light in a dark world. Let's pray.